Okay, we're here to talk about Standard 4 for the site visitor training. This is one of 3 of the accreditation standards, Standards 3, 4, and 5, that deal with matching operations to the program mission. In this case, with respect to Standard 4, the emphasis is on how do operations related to serving students match with the program's mission. There are 4 component parts to this standard. They deal with student recruitment, student admissions, services for students or support for students, and student diversity. So we're going to talk about each one of those in turn with an emphasis on what you need to be paying attention to as a member of the site visit team. So first, starting with student recruitment, the language of the standards is that the program will have student recruitment practices appropriate for its mission. This means that as they have defined in their mission in Standard 1 what student population they are trying to serve, that they set up recruitment practices that are appropriate for that match with that. In terms of the balance of in-service and pre-service students, full-time and part-time students, if there's a particular geographic area that they are trying to serve, or students with particular interests, their student recruitment practices should match that mission. Similarly, with respect to admissions, they should have and apply well-defined admission criteria appropriate for that particular mission. COPRA does not dictate what admission criteria a program will use, but does require that a program actually articulate its admission criteria, that those admission criteria be linked to the mission, and that they actually use those, or if they make exceptions to those, that they have a mission-based rationale for that exception. So here the site visit team is asked to pay attention to, do they have well-defined admission criteria? Do those admission criteria match their mission? If they have an open door policy, do they provide sufficient support for students so that they can be successful in the program? And if they make exceptions or waivers or allow conditional admission under certain circumstances, is there a systematic process for that, and is it related to the mission? So these 2 components of Standard 4, 4.1 dealing with student recruitment and 4.2 dealing with student admissions, clearly have some overlapping components to them. And as you think about what does COPRA want to know, you can think about that having essentially 4 component parts. Do the program's recruitment practices match its mission? Does the program hold students to its admission standards? So if it has standards, is it actually applying those and using them? Third, does the program only admit students with good potential for success? And fourth, how does the program handle admissions exceptions? So it's okay to have exceptions, but they should be mission-driven, they should be transparent, they should be equitable, and there needs to be support provided for students so that they can be successful. So as you are conducting a site visit, one of the things that you will want to look at is the records that a program has regarding how they conduct their recruitment, what kinds of applications for admission they receive, how they review those, what criteria, is there evidence that they're applying their own standards and their own criteria. And when you see examples where a student was admitted who did not meet the admission criteria, is there documentation that there was a mission-based rationale for that exception to the rule? Now, in the self-study report, the program would have been required to provide information on their admission criteria, and you will have this information in front of you before you go on the site visit team. So this is what you can do as kind of a confirmation while you're conducting the site visit. If they say that they require a certain minimum GPA, and you look at the student files or a sampling of those student files, and this doesn't need to be every site visit team member doing this. This might just be one member of the team. If they say they have a minimum GPA, or they say they have a minimum score on a standardized test, or they say they require 3 letters of recommendation, for example, you could pull a sample of the files of students who were admitted and see, Do they in fact meet those criteria? Were they using their own standards? And if they have some exceptions to those, is there some documentation in the student's file explaining why that was done? And does it seem to mesh with the program's mission? You don't make decisions at this point about whether they did things well or poorly. Your task is simply to document that information for COPRA, to provide descriptions of what the records show when you're looking at the documents and when you're talking to people during the site visit. The third component of Standard 4 has to do with support for students, and this is Standard 4.3. The language of the standard is that the program will ensure the availability of support services such as curriculum advising, internship placement and supervision, career counseling, and job placement assistance to enable students to progress in careers in public affairs, administration, and policy. The key thing here is how those support services are, again, related to the mission. If the program largely serves, for example, mid-career students, and they don't have an internship program, or they use the student's existing job to count for the internship, then the emphasis might not be on internship placement as a required student service, but instead perhaps career counseling. In many instances, these are students who are looking to change or advance in their careers, and the program should have in place appropriate services to support that. If it's a program that largely serves pre-service students, then internship placement, career counseling, job placement are going to be critical in order for students to be successful. And whenever you see an exception, particularly an exception to an admission criteria, you need to see that the program has in place sufficient support services for students to still be successful. And again, you don't have to make the judgment calls about whether those support services are adequate, but you need to provide sufficient information to COPRA about the extent and nature of those support services so that COPRA members can make those kinds of decisions. One of the things that we are looking for, COPRA is looking for in this area, is evidence that the students actually are successful, that those students who are admitted are able to graduate in a reasonable amount of time. We understand, of course, that there are things that intervene in the student's program of study. Life intervenes, job interruptions, those sorts of things. And so that not every student is going to graduate in the expected amount of time. But there are expectations for, generally, for most students to be able to be successful if the admission criteria are being applied appropriately. Most of the information that the program has to provide with respect to Standard 4 in the self-study report is data from the self-study year and the year before that, or what's often referred to as self-study year -1. But there is one place in the self-study report where you'll see that the programs actually had to go back and use data from a cohort of students that were admitted 5 years prior to the self-study year. That's the self-study year -5. And this is a table where you may find in many instances that COPRA has identified some questions about the data that the program provided, and you can help clarify that if the program is not clear on how to provide that information accurately. This is table 4.3.3a. It's on page 24 of the self-study instructions. And a number of programs, as they're filling out this particular table, seem to be a little bit confused about what's expected. But essentially what they're asked to do is take that cohort of students that were admitted 5 years prior to the self-study year, document how many were initially enrolled in both full-time and part-time categories as well as overall, how many graduated within the specified degree program length, and that's the program's determination of what it should take to complete the degree. Let's say, for the sake of argument, they say that's 2 years. So what percentage of those students graduated, or in this case actually what number of those students, how many of them graduated within that 2-year period. Then the next column that's asked for is how many graduated in 150% of that degree program length. So if the degree program length is 2 years, 150% of that is within 3 years. So how many graduated within 3 years? This is actually a cumulative column, so it should include all those who graduated within 2 years, as well as those who took an extra year to graduate. And then the final column is how many graduated within 200% of the degree program length. And so that in this case would be within 4 years. Again, cumulative. So that in that last column, we can see how many of the initially enrolled students graduated within that 4-year period in this case. Gives COPRA some idea of what is, are students generally able to finish in the amount of time dictated by the program, and if we give them a little extra time, do we get closer to 100%? There's no expectation that 100% graduate, even within 200% of the degree program length, because some students will drop out, or some students may have shifted to part-time status or taken an extended leave of absence. So you're not, again, you don't have to make decisions about whether a sufficient number of students are graduating within a reasonable amount of time, but to help programs make sure that they've got accurate information in that table so that COPRA can make that decision. All of the other tables are asking for information just in the self-study year and in the immediately preceding year. You will also see that in the self-study report, programs have opportunities to provide narratives or explanations of the data that's reported in the other tables. And if you find some additional information in your conversations or in the documents that you are able to look at during the site visit on campus, you should add that information so that COPRA has that available to them as they make that decision. The fourth section of Standard 4 has to deal with student diversity. And here we're looking to see that the program promotes diversity through a climate of inclusiveness in all aspects of its student services. That's its recruitment, its admissions practices, and its student support services. So in this case, it's not simply looking at the numbers, although that is one of the things that programs have to report in the self-study report. The demographic composition of their student body. But then we're also looking to see, and COPRA wants to have information about what are they doing to ensure that when they have a diverse group of students, or to the extent that they have a diverse group of students, that those students have an environment that is supportive. What are they doing to recruit more diverse students? What are they doing to retain those students and make them feel comfortable, to give them the support services that they need in order to be successful? And in every case, the emphasis as part of the overall nature of this standard is to what extent are all of these activities to promote diversity linked to their particular mission. So with respect to standards 4.3 and 4.4, those that have to do with support services and student diversity, there are several things that COPRA is particularly interested in, and they want you as site visitors to be particularly attentive to. First, what are the program's graduation and attrition rates? To what extent can those be explained? So if the graduation rate is not high and there's a high attrition rate, what's the explanation for that? There might be systemic explanations for that. There might be individual case explanations, and you can help document those. Secondly, are graduates employed in the sector, public or nonprofit sector, in a way that is consistent with the program's mission? So the program will be required in its self-study report to document where do students do their internships and where are they ultimately employed. And in this instance, we're looking to see that there is consistency between what the program says is its mission. It's trying to prepare people perhaps to work in a particular level of government, or focusing on particular policy issues, or maybe it has a nonprofit focus. Do the placements of internships and graduates make sense, and are they consistent with that mission? Again, nobody expects that 100% of a program's students will work directly in that area, but in general, is the program supporting its own mission in that way? Third, what support services are available for students? Here, simply providing descriptions. How frequently are there advising sessions for students? How are advisors assigned to students, or how do students select their advisor? Is there a consistent way for providing curriculum advice? Suggested sequencing of courses. How does the program handle situations when students don't do well in their courses? What kinds of services are available for them? Again, you don't have to make decisions about whether those are adequate or appropriate, but you need to probe and ask questions about whether the program is making those kinds of services that make sense for their mission. Can they define it and describe it in ways that's linked to the mission, so that you can describe it in detail and COPRA can use that as part of their decision making? Fourth, do the student diversity efforts support the program's mission? If they say they are trying to increase the number and level of individuals of color who serve in state government, then are they recruiting individuals of color and preparing them for state government? So linking it to the mission is what's important here. And then finally, does the program ensure that students are exposed to diverse materials? So not every program, based on its location, for example, is going to be able to have a widely diverse demographic composition of its student body. But still, students need to be exposed to a diverse range of perspectives and individuals and materials. And so one of the things that's asked for is how does the program do that? This is part of providing that and promoting that climate of inclusiveness that is so essential for students as part of the student services. So there are many components to Standard 4 regarding recruitment, admissions, support services for students, and student diversity. And in all of these areas, COPRA is looking to see and asking you as a site visitor to document how the program develops its policies, implements those policies through its practices, and documents the outcomes in ways that are consistent with their mission. So thank you for your activities.